There we go. All right. So, episode 7, Eric Haycraft of basilislizards.com and the Instagram handle Caskheaded. I'm super excited to talk to you, man. We just before we went live, I was telling you I had seen all your stuff on Instagram and then finally figured out your real life name when I saw you posting things in a bunch of the different reptile groups that we all kind of belong to. And a lot of the posts that you were making were actually in some of the groups that are dedicated to rarer species, which I thought was cool because it seems like the species that you're keeping are only rare in the sense that you're one of the few people who is successfully doing so with 3 different species in the group and then producing them and so on and so forth. The species themselves have kind of historically been very common, but we're never coming in captive bred, captive born and bred, and with a lot of success. So yeah, man, just kind of take folks through, like, what does the collection look like? What are you working with?
Okay, so since about 2009, not about exactly in 2009, I have been working exclusively with basilisks. Over the past 6 months, that's expanded into some of the corytophanes or the helmeted iguanas. But before that, 2009, if I back up a little bit, I had from all through my teenage years into probably about 20, I was keeping lots of different species of lizards and frogs, primarily lizards though. And there probably back then wasn't much that I didn't at least have for some short period of time. That when I was a teenager would have been mid 80s. So pet stores back then were importing everything. Stuff now that costs hundreds and hundreds of dollars was $10 back then, $15 back then.
Yep.
Additionally, my high school job was in an exotic pet store. And I got to order all the stuff. So every week I would look at the things that fascinated me and order them and take a few home, keep them from some period of time, try to learn something about them. But 80s was, at least in the USA, I think it's like the dark ages compared to now. Around 19 years old, I started playing competitive sports, kickboxing actually. And I was traveling a lot, so there was no way I could maintain any animals at home. So I stopped keeping animals altogether. I had an avid interest in herpetology still, and visited just about every zoo in every city I've traveled across the planet. I've gotten opportunities to go herping in the Amazon and, searching for chameleons in the south of Spain and catching wall lizards in Italy. I mean, there's been lots of cool opportunities that kickboxing afforded me with herpetology. 2009, I started promoting some local shows here in town with, I had a partner, and next door to the venue was a pet store. And I got to this meeting for this event early, and I went into this pet store, and they had a green basilisk or a plumed basilisk there. And it was in really bad shape. It was an adult male. And I saw it, and first thought was, this thing looks terrible. It's going to die. And I walked on. But there was this soft spot that I always had for basilisks that maybe later we can get into that. It's a pretty funny story. But I never got a chance in my own collection to work with them. I worked with them for a short period of time. For about 4 years, I worked at the Louisville Zoo. And I worked with plume basilisks there, but they were quickly eaten by Cuban crocodiles in their exhibit. So we didn't have a long, but it was always a species that fascinated me because as a kid, I had every book that you could buy at every pet store, and there was always the same 5 pictures of plume basilisks. And
Yep.
I always wanted to have one of those. So I saw this thing, and now as an adult, traveling much less. I was retired by that point. I was promoting. I was growing my gym. Still traveling with my own fighters, but had a little bit more time. More importantly, I had a wife that was very supportive, that could help if I was gone and make sure everybody got some water and food if need be. So I went home and told her, listen, if this show's a success and that lizard's still there, I'm going to go back and buy it. I had no animals at that point in time. And that was early 2009. By the end of 2009, I had 4 basilisks, and the male and female had already mated. By the very end of the year, I had my first clutch. Early in the next year, I had my first hatchlings.
Wow.
I brought in a few more adults to put into the mix, and it quickly went from one lizard just to have to I had a small colony of green basilisks. Never ever did it occur to me to even look anything about lizards on social media in 2009 at all. YouTube, that made sense, but I never thought about. I don't even know what was on here in 2009 for social media. I didn't have an Instagram account in 2009. I don't even know if Instagram existed in 2009. So I had this idea that I could produce enough green basilisks to sell to fund trying to get as many species of the 4 basilisk species that there are to create groups of. It's the same mistake that so many people that get into breeding lizards think.
Yep.
Like, it seems so easy. They're going to lay 12 eggs every 60 days. Let's see here. I do the math. I got 6 females. Oh, this is going to be thousands of dollars every year. The problem was I had no way to get rid of plume basilisks.
Right.
And I, over the course from 2009 to about 2018, I think I produced just shy of 400 lizards.
Wow.
I think I sold 4. Like the rest I gave away. I donated to zoos. One zoo, once I said, listen, I'll ship them to you at my own expense as a donation. Deal. They make a call, another zoo. Oh, you're shipping, donating? Yes. Take them. Just take them. Just take them. Which was cool because, years ago, my now wife and I, we could travel to a zoo and, see lizards that these could potentially, we don't know for sure that's the one that we sent here, but might be. Sent them lizards here years ago. The reality check was there was no way that I was going to sell plume basilisks and make any money to expand into other species. So I scaled that project back.
Sure.
I had a little assistance scaling it back because in 2018, we had a really, really unusual ice storm here that took out half the city's power grid. And our power goes, I live in Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
And it's not unusual to have the power out a couple times a year. Spring storm or winter storm for a day, half a day, not for a few hours. This was like 15 days. The power was out.
Wow.
And we managed to save the collection through that 15 days, but I had a lot of respiratory infections that happened in the months that followed. Some of the older animals that were now 9 years old, they passed. So around 2018, I was at a spot where I thought, okay, I want to make one, now that I've got a reduced capacity of these green basilisks, I really wanted to work with Basiliscus basiliscus, which is called the common basilisk, which is really an insane name because it's not common at all. And it was impossible to find in the States. They used to be here back when I worked in a pet store and as a kid. So traveling the world, the type of kickboxing that we specialize is called Dutch kickboxing. And I have lots of friends in Holland. I've probably been to Amsterdam 30 times. And over those years, I managed to find people that were interested in fighting and lizards. So one of my herpetology friends in the Netherlands said, hey, I know a guy in Germany that's breeding basilisks. You should talk to him about getting some. So I shot him an email. And he wrote back and he said, yeah, we've got tons of offspring. We can send them over. They weren't cheap. They were like, for me, they weren't cheap. They were about $300 each.
Sure.
So I told him, listen, I would like to get 6 of these things. That's a good chunk of money for me, especially when you can pick up Plumerfrons for $15.
Right.
And so the shipping it was the first time I ever ordered any animals from overseas. And if we would have just did that order by itself, the shipping would have broke me in half. There would have been no way. It cost more than the animals almost. Not quite, but it would have cost a lot of money. So he piggybacked it on another shipment that he had coming to the States. And of course, when something comes in, you have to have someone with a license to receive it. Then they reship it. So the gentleman that reshipped it contacts me as he picks it up and says, hey, There's only one of these that made it over. The others all died. And I was like, ah.
Whoa.
So instantly I thought, there goes all my money. And I don't want to say the guy's name because if I don't want anyone to expect this kind of service that I got, because I can't speak for him. But the guy was so straight up. He said, I promised you lizards. I'm going to make sure you get what you want. Sit tight. I'm going to send you more. I was like, oh man, that's a stand-up guy, you know?
Wow.
Yeah. So about 6 months goes by. He makes another shipment. This shipment goes to a different importer on the West Coast this time. And there are some paperwork issues. And the entire order gets seized by California Fish and Wildlife. And the guy that was receiving it calls me and says, hey, here's the number of the guy. If you want to call him and tell him, you know, the issue isn't with your animals, it's with some other CITES animals that didn't have the proper paperwork.
Okay.
And it was just apparently a mistake on the paperwork. So I called the Fish and Wildlife guy, and he was like, hey, sorry, buddy, but that's not how any of this works. These animals are California's animals now. So I imagine those lizards went to somewhere in the Bay Area at a zoo or something like that. So again, this wonderful person says, I promised you animals, don't worry. But now
Wow.
I felt terrible, right? I felt like, is it worth me risking killing more and more of these animals just to have them?
Right.
And I had
Understandable.
one, right? I had one. So I told him, I said, look, man, I'm getting cold feet with this whole thing. It's proving a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. And he goes, let me just refund your money. The money that I said, we don't refund for one. I've got one animal. So he did. He refunded all my money back. And he said, listen, in the future, we'll try this again. But I kind of gave up on it. I just had, my Plumifrons colony reduced down from the cold than this. And I was kind of like, okay, this is a good time to unplug a little bit, go back to visiting zoos and looking at all those things. Randomly, I don't even know why, but your Facebook feed will be filled with the things you follow. Mine was completely fighting. It was fighting 100%. I had 5,000 people on there, all fight related. It was completely business for my personal account. So I wasn't looking at lizards. There wasn't lizards in my feed like there are now. For some reason, I punched in basilisk into Facebook one day, and I found a Corythophonidae group. And so I start scrolling down through this, and I was like, wow, this is crazy. There's a whole bunch of people keeping basilisks now. This would have been amazing to know about when I was trying to sell basilisks. So as I'm scrolling through, I come across a picture of a common basilisk, adult, and I recognize the lizard. It's one of the ones from Germany that was the parent, the ones I had. I had seen this animal before, like that animal. I recognized that very animal specifically. So I peck away real fast at the guy, and it turns out the guy had an alias account. And I said, hey, you don't know me. My name's Eric. I live in the United States. And the alias name was kind of a foreign sounding name. And I thought, oh, this could definitely be someone else in Europe that's breeding these. And I was like, do you mind if I ask where you're located? And they came back and they said, I'm in North Carolina. What? North Carolina? Is this your animal? Yes, I have a lot of these. What? And the gentleman, I said, listen, I've seen this animal before. You're going to think I'm crazy. Did you get this animal from Germany? And I didn't get a reply back. And it was like, we were back and forth, and then it stopped. And I thought, this is some, and then it said, do you mind? Can you call me? So I was like, yeah, give me your phone number. I'll give you a call. So I call.
Wow.
Sure enough, it's a guy, an American guy. And he says, how do you know these animals are from Germany? And I was like, I've seen this animal before. And he was like, where have you seen this animal? And I was like, I bought some offspring of this animal before, I assume. I mean, I bought offspring, and these were the photos. I've seen an array of all these adults. And he was like, I bought all of those adults. I've got that entire collection in the USA now. But he didn't have any offspring. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. This is amazing. That guy's name was Ryan Johnson. And over the course of the last couple of years, we've became like the best of friends. We actually met once. But he told me, listen, when I breed these things, I'm gonna make sure you get some. Don't worry. And like as we kind of go through it all, and I tell him my story, how I knew about the guy, the collection in Germany. He says it's really crazy, but I've heard your name. He actually told me when I bought these that when I have offspring, I should hook you up with a good price and take care of you because you had a really difficult time.
Wow.
Oh, that's crazy. He goes, but I didn't know who you were, so I didn't know,
Sure. Yeah.
Well, he acquired them because of the same reason that I wanted them. Well, I wanted them because I love basilisk, and it's a species that I personally hadn't worked with before. Same for him, but also because nobody had them anymore in the USA, and they sell for quite a bit more than any of the other species, with exception of galleritis, which no one can get right now. And so he was hoping that they were going to breed, and it could be like a nice new animal on the market with a nice price tag on it. What happened in between that and now, though, is Nicaragua opened up export for quite a few of them. Now, all the ones he had were from Costa Rica, and the locality is a little bit different. They're a little bit more remarkable, the Costa Rican, than the Nicaraguan. But for a huge price difference, I don't think anybody's going to care. If you offer somebody a $300 animal or a $55 animal, they're going to take that $55 animal. Well, he was nice enough. He was actually working in his real job in Florida. When the import came in, he called me and he goes, "You're not going to believe what I'm looking at. I need your home address." And I was like, "I don't know what you're getting ready to do, but don't send anything to my house." I need right now. I'm at this desk and I need your address. So I gave him my address, and he goes, "I will call you when this is over." So he calls as soon as he's done, and he says, I was looking at 60 basiliscus down here in Florida at this importer, and I'm sending you 6 of these things." And I was like, "What?" And so he sent 6 subadults to my house, and the ratio looked somewhat at that time like I probably had 50-50, like 3 males, 3 females, and I was like stoked, completely stoked. As I right away, the obsessive compulsive part of me wanted to add to that group in case I lost some of these, because they're imports, they're wild animals.
Yeah.
I didn't want the ratio to swing any which way. I wouldn't be able to keep the 3 adults together. I'd have to separate them off. So I might as well try to acquire some females. So I contacted that importer, and they had some, they call them B grades. They had the ones that were like broken tails and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, "Listen, I don't care, because their offspring are going to have full tails.
Right.
As long as they're alive, send them to me." And I got them for like $10. So here I was just a few years earlier paying $300 an animal, now to $10, which I was ecstatic to get them. But I also realized if they keep importing like this, I'm going to be right back where I was with the plumifrons, mass producing these things with nowhere to go.
Right.
So I ended up with, all done and said, I yet again ordered another wave of B grades afterwards. And I've got, now the group I have is about 15 strong, 6 males and the rest females all around that. And they're all doing great. Additionally, my friend Ryan's group, he took a portion of his group and housed it with, do you know Scott Corning? Mm-hmm. He does hydrosaurs. Yep. That's what he's famous for. But Scott had success breeding those Costa Ricans, and then they shipped me a male and female from that group. So I've got those as well, and they'll come into age this year. And they do look quite a bit different than the Nicaraguans, which is kind of cool. I like having both of them now, at least. But I had planned when I got these things last year that in 2022, I would probably start having some level of success with them. But I'm sitting on about 60 babies right now. They really just started going and going and going. I just hatched out another clutch yesterday, and another female laid a clutch yesterday, and I got another clutch still in the incubator that's due in 2 weeks.
Wow.
And then I've got anything from 8 months up, of babies all the way down. I had pre-COVID large scale order going back to Europe, and poof, that's gone
Right.
for now. For now, the interest is still there, the demand is still there, but it's not possible to ship right now.
Right.
So I'm raising lots of baby lizards in hopes that there'll be something, and if there's not, then they're probably going to be a lot less expensive as we get back into something normal at some point. The only species that I had bred prior to that when I was young was Vitatus, the striped basilisk.
Mhm.
So I picked up some more stripes several years ago, and just so I could have those the three available species to me. And then my entire plan with the social media stuff was I was going to raise a banner and draw as much attention to I'm a guy working with basilisks, and this is where I'm coming from. I'm very much like I fancy myself a keeper instead of a collector, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I'm very interested in the natural history of the animals. I take very detailed notes. For every enclosure I build, I try to match out as much to their natural range as possible. I try to I've got an Alexa in the room that tells me every day in the city closest to the places these animals are collected, what's the temperature today, what's the weather today, and I try to replicate all that as much as possible at home.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's crazy what technology's done. It's crazy. So my hopes are that if I can keep having the success that I'm having, and more people start taking interest in it, then I'm going to find somebody it's working with galleritis in Europe. It'll definitely be in Europe. I've got a couple leads on galleritis in Europe but they're the kind of leads of I know a guy that knows a guy, and they're the middlemen, right? So
Right.
they don't want to take me to the guy because they want to. If there's going to be something for sale, they want to take their cut.
Sure.
And so I keep saying, okay, I'm going to wait because, again, I'm not a rich man for lizards, especially in COVID era. I'm going to keep this banner up there, and maybe the guy that's breeding these is going to see it himself. And it's been really fascinating. I've met a lot of really interesting people just through the social media posts. And the reason I originally started posting in all the rare reptile forums was there's so many of these groups, so many. And it's honestly a depressing nightmare in most of them of the posting and the pissing contests and the just the general chaos, or the people are so proud to post an animal that's very soon going to die, and they have no idea that this animal they're sharing, like, look at my lovely animal, and I'm like, that animal's almost dead.
Yep.
And in the rare species, you get a little bit more serious keepers. You get people that are spending a little bit more money, so they put a little bit more research in. And for me, that common basilisk, the Basiliscus basiliscus, is not. It is a rare animal. They were prior to these big Nicaraguan imports,
Right.
and they probably still are, considering that I would dare say that probably 90% of those are dead already. That came
Which,
in.
I mean, is, kind of the track record for imports anyway.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and like I was saying, it makes sense. The rarity aspect of what you are talking about makes sense in that for you to have the specific species that you have and to successfully have them,
Yeah.
the rarity isn't necessarily the number of animals or their rarity in the wild or so on and so forth. The rarity is in captivity, in good care, not trending toward immediate death.
Yeah.
It is a rare thing in the United States for those specific species.
Yeah. They're really easy if you set them up the right way from the get-go. That's the problem, though. The right way from the get-go is that they need lots and lots of space. And even the indoor enclosures that I'm keeping mine in, I mean, I wish I could quadruple the size of those things. I've got, my current Pluma Fronds group is it's 8 foot, 7 foot, 4 foot deep. It's got a 60-gallon pond in the bottom of it. And they're all young adults and they got plenty of room in there, but there's no way that you see a video of a wild basilisk streaking 30 meters across the surface of some water. And you think, well,
right.
I got 8 feet, you go
Yeah.
for it, run away, buddy. So, every new rendition, every 10 years, my projects get a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. The cages get a little bigger. I have some outdoor enclosures that I keep the animals in during the summer now that are quite large, and that's been very rewarding. But I have limited capacity to build more and more of those right now. So
sure.
But the problem is, it's the same problem with most lizards in captivity. If you go into any of the big box pet stores, there's nobody in there with expertise about reptiles or especially lizards. And they are driven to sell these. This is a line of stuff that we have, these instant homes.
Mm-hmm.
And most of those things aren't the best options for the animals that are available. And a basilisk is not going to do well as it gets to subadult onto adult in any size aquarium. It's not going to do well you're going to have to give it some space, some big space. They're not animals that want to be held. They will for sure learn to live in captivity with you. All mine will come up and take food out of my hands, but I don't ever grab them or pick them up or hold them or pet them or any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
I feel like I'll leave that everything's on their terms for what kind of interaction they want to have. And by doing that, I end up having far better success with interaction than if I feel like if I were trying to force that upon them. So my ultimate goal, it kind of expanded over the years. It was to eventually not just have 4 species of basilisk, but to have 4 breeding groups of all species, at least 4 groups of all the species. Then I thought, how cool would it be if I can manage that with the whole family? Because it's a relatively small family. Like if someone said, I'm going to breed every species of anole there is, there's no way you can do it. It's impossible.
Right. It's just too much.
Yeah, but this family of lizards is relatively small. There's 2 coneheads, there's 3 helmeted iguanas, and there's 4 species of basilisk. And that's it. And then there's some, more than likely a few subspecies in the mix in there. But for the most part, that's it. That covers it. And that's a very easy thing to do. And so I've got a small group of Corytophanes cristatus. They're rolling now. I've got one young male Hernandezi, and then I've got a really completely lucked into a Pericinatus. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a rough-keeled Guatemalan helmeted iguana, and they're not even importable anymore, unless you happen to find somebody that's pulling one in out of like Honduras maybe or somewhere like that on the edge of the range.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't get them from Guatemala anymore.
It's one of those lizards that happened to walk across that borderline real quick.
Man, here's what happened. It's really fun. I saw this animal on Fauna Classifieds last year listed as a cristatus. And cristatus has a huge amount of variability. They really are all over the place. And I thought, I've never seen a cristatus that look like that. That looks amazing. Scroll, 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 scroll. And then in that group that I've found, one day this guy, really nice guy, pops up with some pictures of some helmeted iguanas that he acquired. He had 1 of each species. And everybody in the group was like, whoa, what's this? And then when we really looked at it, I was like, where did you get this animal at? And he was like, oh, it was the female. It came with the male. It's like, these aren't the same. And all the European guys were like, how did you get that? You can't get this anymore. And then I completely lucked out. And I think this is kind of where the benefit of hoisting that flag comes into play, is that gentleman contacted me and said, hey, I think I want to, get out of this. Would you maybe want to trade some basiliscus for this. And I was like, oh, yes, I definitely would. But then it leaves me with the issue that I've got this amazing animal that I get to learn about, but I've got one female. And,
Right.
so I'm keep raising the flag, hoping that maybe there's another one that's snuck across the border somewhere in a group, So like
Right.
a huge shipment of cristatus just came into Florida again. There's probably 200 of them down there right now. And if I could just, I feel like, man, I could fly down, I could dig through them all and see, but it's slim chances. But I'm gonna hope that I can put that one together, because it's another one of the species that'll be relatively difficult. The coneheads are pretty simple. There's a lot of people working with those right now that are doing really good work with those guys. So that's just a matter of forking over some money and getting some, and I can actually get captive bred in that, which makes it even better.
Right.
And so I expect that probably by next year, I'll have most of my boxes checked. There's going to be a few species that are going to be long-term seek and find type things that maybe is going to have to fall into my lap, I think. But I'm pretty committed to finding those too. So, and then my goal will be, so I have this secret fantasy that I can convince my local zoo to create an exhibit with a trio of all 4 species of basilisks that we can donate, and they can be there. And my girls help me raise these animals. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. I love them, and I think it would be cool if we had some animals at the zoo. I have zero expectation how would I even go about that, but
That would be amazing.
yeah. So it's funny. I have such a long, like, the zoo here in my city is such a big part of my life. When I was in middle school, I was in the 8th grade. I started volunteering at the zoo, and during the summer, I would go every day. I would ride my 10-speed bike, 26 miles to the zoo, spend the day there. And when I first started volunteering at the zoo, we had the Louisville Zoo had a pretty substantial reptile and amphibian collection that was completely off exhibit. It was kept in a warehouse off of zoo property.
Really?
It was a staging area because they were in preparation to build what they call now the Herp Aquarium, and it was a big, in the 80s, it was state of the art. It's aged very well, but it has aged. I would love to see them update that soon, but so they were amassing all this collection, and then as the building went into production, I was fortunate to be there every day as all the plans were made for what each exhibit was going to look like, how that was going to be laid out, what kind of species it was. Everybody on the team would get a list of animals, and we would all go to the library, because this is before the internet, and we would do everything, the stuff that I'm interested in now. What's the average annual rainfall? What's the temperature throughout the year? What's the, what kind of plants are in these things? And these are the lists we would come back to try to make these habitats for the animals. And it was an amazing experience to be through that whole process, to see the whole thing come together from ground breaking to cut the tape opening day. And the director of our zoo now, when I was young, was the curator of herpetology, and he went on eventually to become the whole zoo director. And it's a gentleman by the name of John Walzak. And it would be crazy for me to even talk about lizards and not mention this guy, because he has to be the most patient person on the planet. So as a kid, man, you got to think the aquarium, I believe, opened in '86. So it was even years before this. I used to come home from school every day and go straight to the yellow pages, and I would call every pet store in my city and ask what they got in today for lizards. And they never got in things every day. One pet store guy made a mistake one day. When I was there, I was like, oh, what is this? And somebody had traded something in. And I said, when do you guys get stuff in? He goes, well, stuff like this comes in all the time. So I just started calling every day,
Mm-hmm.
and they all knew my voice. They were all really nice for the most part. Nothing's in today. Try again tomorrow. Talk to you tomorrow. The sarcasm was lost on me at the time.
Sure.
I can laugh about it now. Well, somehow I found out about John Walzak and the curator of herpetology at the Louisville Zoo. And I started calling him. I would go to the library. I would walk from my school to the public library. And every day I would research something lizard related. Sometimes it was, one of the early difficult species that I got as a kid in the 80s, mind you, was a Senegal chameleon. And in the 80s, every chameleon everybody thought was some kind of a tropical animal that needed to be in a glass box with 100% humidity, and you had to soak them with water. And this is a West African animal that lives in a savanna.
Yep.
And didn't need those things at all. The reason most of them were dying was not because they were so fragile, as nobody was providing the right environment. But you find these things out by, this is where they're from, this is what the ecosystem looks like where they're from, replicate that. But I would go and read these things and then call him and bounce ideas off of him. And he would take my call every day. And I'm not exaggerating what a pain in the ass it must have been. I called the guy every day. And he never once ducked out on the call. And
Wow.
yeah, it's pretty crazy. I can remember before I started volunteering at the zoo, one day I ended up with a green tree skink. Nobody knew what it was. It was at a pet store. And the guy told me, you come here, look at this. And I was like, how much is that? It was $12. And I was like, $12.99. I want it. Convinced my stepmom to buy it. So nobody knew what it was. So I had a hamster ball that I put the thing in. And I called John Walzak and said, can I bring this lizard over there and see what it is? So I take it over to him. He didn't know what it was. Nobody knew what it was. And he had a library in the office there, and he lets me sit down at their library and go through all the books trying to find it. And it took me a long time to figure out what it was. Eventually, I found out what it was. And but he was the one that suggested at some point, he's like, maybe you should come volunteer at the zoo, which was genius for him, because as soon as he got me in the building working with actual animals, I quit calling him every day.
Of course.
Yeah. But I would see him every day still. It was cool, But those guys, all those guys, they were so amazing. Like it was, for me, I didn't have, me and my father were not super close. So to go there and have like that, these male role models that were experts in something that I was fascinated with was a really lucky thing for me to have. And fast forward to now that I'm an adult and I have young children. Like my daughter is 4. She just recently turned 4. Since she's 1 year old, we've had a standing date weekly at the zoo. We go every week. She knows all the animals. She knows everything about the animals. And my 2-year-old has joined in the mix as soon as she was old enough to go. And my son, who's just a couple months old, he'll go as soon as he's old enough to go. And I think about sometimes just the sheer amount of hours I've spent at that zoo. And that's it's a cool thing. It's a cool thing.
That's amazing. So do you think, well, I mean, I've got to think it probably did. Was that kind of a pretty big influence on you as far as building enclosures? Because a huge part of my following you was watching all of your builds and seeing, I just saw you posted a thing about updating the lights. And every time I saw you posting something, if it wasn't a clutch success, it was new portion of an enclosure. I ripped this out. I redid that. It seemed like your posts are pretty constant of this is going to be better or bigger or new or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. 100%. So like, I like to say I'm building a poor man's zoo. So like, the resources that they have to make those enclosures at a zoo are amazing.
Of course.
What I've done and learned, and YouTube is an incredible thing, an absolutely incredible thing. So the first big enclosure I made was back in 2009 when I got that first year of getting the puma fronds. And that was the 8 foot by 7 foot by 4 foot deep enclosure. I did fake rock, fake pyramid, everything. And I learned how to make the fake pyramid out of styrofoam and grout off of a video that was like, it's called like lizardlandscapes.com or something like that. And they had a whole bunch of videos and people would upload their stuff that they put, but they were making like little bitty things for an aquarium. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, I don't know if I can do this, but I made a big pyramid, a big, 3 foot tall pyramid, and then rock work that went up every wall in the enclosure. And I learned how to do it. It wasn't terribly difficult. A little bit of trial and error, and then I've just expanded upon all that. I'm building another big enclosure now. I just painted the ceiling, and so that'll also come. This one has a crazy waterfall that I'm experimenting with inside of it. So yeah, I even when I was a kid, I did the same thing. I always the outside of those enclosures are just plywood. I don't do anything. I don't stain them. I don't paint them. They look rough on the outside, but on the inside, I want them to look as natural as possible. I think, especially with the types of species that I'm dealing with, they do way better when they've got the sounds, the colors, the lights. For me, I look at an animal and I think that how incredibly boring it must be for a lizard in captivity. So if you think that a typical day, especially for a basilisk, a male basilisk he's going to probably have a territory the size of about a football field, and it's probably going to be on the bank of a creek or a river, a small stream. He's going to probably be on a perch where he can overlook that whole area. And he's going to spend the day doing a couple things. One, defending that territory and all the females in it, chasing the females, running away from birds that are trying to get him, hunting. He's got to sit on that perch and watch for everything. The wind blows, the leaves move, that might be a predator. There's constant things that are going on in that lizard's life. Now, fast forward to an aquarium. There's no wind. The leaves don't blow in the tank. The sun doesn't rise and set, and he follows it to different perches. The light is in one spot overhead. So what I've tried to do with my enclosures are a couple of things. I want to make it as interactive for the animal as possible. So in all the big structures, I have multiple types of lights, and it starts with the sunrise, and they are on a timer, and it just goes over the enclosure to sunset. So it starts with a low mount light that goes each gradually higher overhead, drops down the other side to where there's a sunset. Additionally, I got fans on top of it. Plenty of air circulation, but I don't really care about the circulation as much as I care about the plants moving, right? I want the animal to be like, what's that? What's that? What's that? What's that over there? Engaged, right? Alive. I mean, an animal taking care of its life is invigorating for that creature. Whereas you just put them in a tank and now they get fat, they get lazy, they give up, they don't care about it. And for me, what I've seen with that is a lot more behavior that I would have ever seen. So with my early days with plumer fawns, they weren't, I didn't have all of that stuff dialed in yet. The first enclosure that I built big, they had lots of space, but I didn't have any fans. They just had the lights in one place. The lights all kicked on at one time. They all kicked off at the other time. There was no, the temperature was like all the way or none of the way. Everything was the same. Mm-hmm. When I started graduating those things to different times throughout the day, then you start seeing a lot of different behaviors that you don't normally see. There's a lot more interactions. There's a lot more communication. You see the animals, they have their own little language in there, and it's pretty cool to watch them and try to observe it all. And then I vary the diet. I like huge amounts. So I feed all the basilisks, crayfish, night crawlers, superworms, crickets, roaches, and then some fruits, mostly bananas lately. And then I'll rotate through those depending on A, what time of year it is, and B, every day of the week is something a little bit different along the way. During the summer months, my whole family will go to the creek and we'll catch crayfish by the hundreds. And all my basilisk enclosures have huge ponds in the bottom. We just fill them up with crayfish. Most of the tanks are deep enough that the crayfish stay safe, but I can net them out at will, put them in a shallow end for them to catch and eat. And then I'm breeding roaches. I'm breeding superworms. I'll buy crickets, and then I buy earthworms in bulk. And I've got planters full of dirt in the lizard rooms, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of night crawlers in there, and feed everything at home myself. So I know what the roaches are eating. I know what the superworms are eating. I know what the night crawlers are eating. And yeah, it's fun. I like it. I've gotten really good results with it. Like,
Yes, very much so.
yeah.
With the crayfish, was that something you got from literature, or is that something you decided to try just based on their environment?
Yeah, so I read an article years and years and years ago about Bert Lingerworth was collecting basilisks in Costa Rica. No, in Panama in this article. And he was chasing one of the basilisks across a creek, and it ran up on the bank, and it ran into a little hole. And when he reached in the hole to get it out, there was a crab in there, and the crab pinched him. And like then you realize, okay, these things are living around all these small crustaceans. And I was like, I bet they eat small crabs. So the first foray I had with that was not catching crayfish, but I bought fiddler crabs at a pet store as an experiment. And as soon as I held it up, every lizard in the room was like, what's this? And I never seen them like that focused. And before it hit the ground, boom, somebody had it. Crunch, gone. And crustaceans proved to be their absolute favorite food. 100%.
Wow.
And which is fine because I can go to the creeks. We've got some really nice state park creeks here that are clean. And I can catch crayfish by the hundreds and bring them home. And my kids thinks it's fun. My wife, who's the best, because she tolerates I'm lucky the girls are interested in the animals, because I always use that as an excuse.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. If they didn't care about it at all, I'd have a lot harder to sell, because it gradually has taken over the house. The whole project. But crayfish are an amazing food item, amazing, and we can catch them tiny all the way up, and bring them all back, and the little ones will eat them, the big ones will eat them. It works out really well, and I think. For us, I have to do minimal supplementation ever.
Okay.
Two reasons. I think it's the variety of food that we're feeding and what we're feeding the food. And then the other reason I think is I use a lot of different kind of lights on every enclosure. So, for example, I've got on the plumerfons, for example, and this is somewhat replicated on all the enclosures. First light that kicks on when it comes on is a low mercury vapor bulb, and then it pops up to another mercury vapor bulb, and then an Arcadia T5 kicks on, and then next I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 4-foot T8s that kick on above that. Then a heat lamp comes on, just a halogen heat lamp, and then a metal halide kicks on, and then as that. And it's each one of those kicks on, one of the earlier ones kicks off. And then it ends with, at the other end, another mercury vapor bulb at the other end, low. And you'll see the animals will choose which light they want and when and why. So it's hard for me to say, like, is the metal halide better than the mercury vapor, better than the Arcadia, because they actually bask at some point in the day under all of them.
Right.
And I kind of feel like I'm never going to replicate the sun, but I've probably got as close as I'm going to get with the technology we have today, which is crazy. So remember I mentioned that I kind of got back into the hobby in 2009.
Right.
And it was quite a few years before, I guess 93 or 4 is when I checked out. And in the late 80s and the 90s, like the high tech, I'm not sure how long have you been in the hobby?
I'm going on, 22 years. So like late 90s for me.
Do you remember, it might've been gone by the late 90s, but do you remember Vita light bulbs?
Yeah. Yeah.
So like that was the like breakthrough reptile light, bird and reptile light back in the day.
Yeah.
And if you brought that in today, everybody would say, this is shit. What is this?
Yeah. And well, all that stuff was off of birds, because birds were the cool thing and they made more money. And then we just got like their side fillings.
And we were watching the wrong people because the fish folks had it all figured out all along.
Yep.
Fish folks were using metal halide, all that stuff already for corals. And yeah, it's interesting, but the technology was the one thing I was pretty surprised about when I kind of got back in the hobby and looked around. It was like, man, it's come a long way. When I was a kid, nobody knew what herpetology meant. If you said that when I was in ninth grade, if I said herpetology in my biology classroom, the whole room giggled, like it was I went to my herpes or something, And so I never talked about anything I did. I was a loner because of that, because it was just such a intense interest that the only people that I ever talked to any of that stuff about were the people that I worked with at the zoo. And then fast forward to 2009, there's Nat Geo shows with herpetologists on it. It's like suddenly it's cool to be a herpetologist, and you go to the pet store and there's just like crazy amounts of supplies for reptiles. It's crazy how popular everything got.
Yeah.
The trend in my area, I would imagine it's probably a national trend, is all the small specialty pet stores are gone. The only thing left are big box stores, Petco, stuff like that. And it's kind of depressing because it's good and it's bad, right? It's depressing because I think that one of the good things they've done is they've restricted back to mostly manageable species for captivity.
True. Yes.
In the 90s, we were importing stuff that we didn't even know what it was and selling it for really cheap. And almost all of that stuff was sure to die. Now you go in and it's going to be the same stuff. There's going to be a bearded dragon. There's going to be a leopard gecko. There's going to be a ball python, a veiled chameleon somewhere in the mix. And then maybe one-off something a little crazier than that. But for the most part, it's just those things. That's good in a way. What's sad is, even with just those things that thrive in captivity, they're selling and pushing people in totally wrong directions with those animals at a large scale. And that's super depressing. But yeah. I don't know the solution to that. I mean, the solution I feel like was somewhat to have those specialty shops, but then the specialty shops create an increased demand for weird stuff. So it's a catch-22. I don't know what the right answer is really.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was like, there still is a specialty shop fairly close to me. And it, even for them, like if you come in and you know what you're talking about, and you've met them and you've talked to them, you could order some weird stuff and you could ask for some weird stuff. They don't routinely get it in. They still, North American colubrids, maybe some carpet pythons, bunch of ball pythons, maybe some panther and veiled chameleons. There's like one setup with some dart frogs. It's still a lot of the bread and butter stuff.
Right.
They get a little more, not even really more advanced, but maybe more pricey, because then you start talking about, the morph market and all kinds of different stuff like that. But even so, like they still stay fairly bread and butter. It's just that if it gives you the opportunity, if you're, I don't know, not necessarily more serious, but just maybe more advanced,
sure,
that you don't always have to go online or, go to a Facebook group or whatever. You can still go talk to someone in person and try to order this thing. But I also kind of like that too, because it's a little bit, I don't know. I don't really like the whole gateway thing, but it is a little bit of a gateway where they're not just going to order you something insane without talking to you. And that probably has more to do with the integrity of the store. I mean, there are some places that if you offer them a check, that they're going to order the lizard. But like I do like that little bit of check and balance. Like, you can't just roll in and buy an alligator or whatever insane thing. But yeah, man, the number of outlets and resources for people more toward us, we're much more serious about it. we are researching the obscure things that like don't have common names. And if you, and that's the thing too, though, if you walk into a store and you're trying to order something by Latin name, they probably take it a little more seriously that the thing you're asking for.
Yeah.
Ordering it in 1,000-year-old dead language kind of helps. But yeah, it's difficult to. I'm glad.
Where is it you live? Where do you live?
I am like an hour and a half south of Chicago.
Okay.
So the NARBC Tinley Park is right north of me, and the guy who owns the store is one of the co-owners, sponsors of NARBC, and so his shop is right there.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, through NARBC and through those guys, you could access anything.
Yeah.
But you got to know to walk in and ask. It's not just going to be on the shelf.
Right.
Which is cool. Like, it's great that you can go to a big box store and get a setup, get a leopard gecko, and any kid now who turns 10 and wants a birthday present, it makes it more feasible for their family, and that's awesome. It's just you are lacking that person working in the store that actually knows what a leopard gecko is, or could tell, like it's much more of a commodity because of the size of the industry on that end. Whereas, or at least the way I feel for like mom and pop stores, the commodities in mom and pop stores are bedding and frozen rodents and, like actual commodity items that they order off of a semi truck, to get the cheapest Aspen prices or whatever.
Right.
The animals never really seem like a commodity in the mom and pop stores, typically because they're straight up buying them from a breeder like yourself, who is, they got a frog guy and a gecko guy and they got a guy, and I don't know. It's just, it's a whole different vibe, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, it surprises me a lot to still, when I go in a store, I know what I'm going to see. But I think about all those years when I worked in the pet industry, and it was just, we had so many crazy animals come through there. And it's better. It really is better that that's not happening now, because all those animals, they all died,
Right.
But now when I think about, like, man, I would like to work with this species, in my brain, I'm like, they're only $24. And they're not $24 anymore. Everything's way more expensive now. So
yeah.
Do you remember what was your first reptile?
My very first reptile was an ocellated skink that I did not know was gravid. And I came home to 4 little faces sticking out of the sand next to the big face. And then I went to get pinhead crickets for them. She immediately ate one of them. And I didn't know. I just thought I couldn't find it.
Right.
And, and it was the same way. I was talking to some guy in a pet store that didn't even know what I was talking about. And I said that it had babies, and there's these little lizards, and he didn't tell me to separate them or anything like that. And I've caught her eating the second one, and that's when I put 2 and 2 together, and I should separate those. But yeah, it was, which is another, like, I think at the time, man, even back then, that lizard was like $15 or so. It was super cheap. And that's another one that I don't know when the last time I saw one was, it was it's always little weird things, but yeah, it was an ocellated skink, and it had babies immediately, of course.
So when my grandmother was alive, she lived about an hour outside of the city. She had a little bit of land. It was in the thick woods, and me and my brother would spend our summers there, or at least large chunks of our summers, just playing in the woods all day. So from as far back as I can remember as a kid, we would spend our summers catching everything that lived natively around here. So, fence swifts and 5-line skinks and gray tree frogs and, box turtles, everything that we could find around that area. And over the years, we probably caught everything. We keep them in milk cartons for a day or two and then let them out. And fast forward to, I was in the 3rd grade, and I was in the city here, my parents, we lived in an apartment complex, and I was sitting on my back porch, and I look over in the grass, and a little green lizard is running through the grass. And I never in my life seen a green lizard in Kentucky. And there are no native green lizards in Kentucky. And I was like, what is that? So I grabbed it and I was looking at it, and I had no idea what it was. I'd never been to a pet store to look at lizards. My full experience up to the third grade was just catching native stuff at my grandmother's house out in the sticks.
Sure.
So I brought it in and showed my parents, and they were like, well, we had a hamster, like all kids get a hamster. And we didn't have a hamster anymore. Didn't go long, but we had an aquarium. I think an aquarium for a hamster. Because if you want to put in that aquarium, we'll go to the pet store and see what it is. So in the third grade, they drove me over with this aquarium in my lap. Went in, and the guy says, "Oh, that's a chameleon." And I was like, "Oh, wow, it's a chameleon." So off to the library I go, and everything I can find about chameleons doesn't look anything like this thing.
Yep.
And then the more I read, then I started finding, oh, wait a minute. Some people were calling these things chameleons, and it wasn't a true chameleon. But I found out what it was. It was just a green anole. And the best I can figure now is that somebody had a green anole pet that got away or they let go, and it stumbled into my yard. Well, I convinced my parents to let me keep it, so I kept it. And that started everything. It was like one green anole and then two green anoles and then a brown anole made in the mix. And like a year later, a Christmas present of a baby green iguana. And then, my parents really, they were very supportive of it in the beginning. I don't think they knew what was going to happen. But by the time I reached high school, I had a menagerie of animals in the basement. It was pretty insane. Because I worked in a pet store. So I had a whole colony of red-eyed tree frogs. I had a big 75-gallon tank with 3 matamatas in it. I had a kiddie swimming pool with stingrays, freshwater stingrays. I had my Senegal chameleons. I had quite a few chameleons. That was probably my favorite lizard as a kid, were all chameleons. And,
dude, what's crazy is you are talking about a time frame when not a lot of people were super successful of keeping animals.
Yeah.
And other than the anoles, like every species you just described is still something that not a lot of people successfully keep. Like that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's like all still cool animals. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was those were all my long-term things that I kept. And then what would happen, I would have my rotating tanks for things that I was curious about. And then I would borrow from the pet store. So we had a really cool boss that would let us charge things on instead of paying that day, you could just write down what you took as long as you're upfront about it. And you get around to paying for it when you get around to paying for it. So I would take stuff for a month and be like, take it back to the shop, scratch it off my list, sell the animal. And so I got an opportunity to see a lot of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
But dude, that's like the hobby part of this. And a lot of people who aren't pet keepers always find it weird when this is described as a hobby to people. But that really is a part of it. I've told people forever that, your hobby is woodworking, right? And you started out whittling with your grandpa or whatever. And then you did it until you're in your 50s. All right. By the time you're in your 50s, you're probably not a hobbyist. You're probably a professional woodworker. You just don't do it for a living because you have a day job and It's your hobby or whatever. Right. What you're talking about for your experience, that's the hobby part of this, where it's had red-eyed tree frogs and I rocked at them. Had matamatas and I rocked at them. And then these other things, I was checking them out. Didn't really work for me. It didn't work for my room or the part of the country I live in or whatever. And then you had the opportunity where you were able to take it back to the store, or, nowadays there's tons of social media groups where people trade things and shift stuff out. And it's frowned on sometimes because it sometimes feels like people might be doing it irresponsibly or what have you. But I mean, that's a part of it. Especially for your experience, you're talking about, you were younger, And
Yeah.
so, that that wasn't your house, it was somebody else's house. So, like if you brought home a black throat monitor, you might not be able to keep it perfectly because the lady who owns the house would say no. And but that's the hobby part of it, to then grow up, you got your own house, your own career, all this kind of stuff, and then you're going to come back in, and that colors all of that, like what you're picking, how you're keeping it now, all the stuff you're describing, like you're describing all the technology that's available to you now, as opposed to when you started in the hobby. But you are also making use of that technology when there's people in the hobby right now that they wake up and their generation has never not had the internet or a phone or what have you, and aren't using the lights in the way that you're using them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that colors it, that you had all of those experiences and were in it when that didn't exist.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there in, or at least for me, in the 90s and in the time when it was like, man, what if I could make this or do that? Or it didn't exist. Like I didn't know where to get a light to do that.
Right. Right.
Now I'm an adult and I can order it off Amazon. And so, I can realize those things that I was thinking about this the whole time I was in the hobby when it just didn't exist, and it seems that has, colored your experience and now you're successfully creating it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that.
So you were saying, incredibly varied diet. Do you feel the need to supplement with anything, or do you think that covers it as far as producing females and stuff?
I do it like when my females are gravid, and then right after they've laid eggs.
Okay.
And then not a lot other than that, really. Now, one of the things I do is I keep like calcium carbonate turtle blocks in all of my water.
Okay.
Yeah, for every pond has those calcium carbonate blocks in there. So that every time they're in there, if they're drinking that water, they're gonna consume some of that calcium carbonate out of the water.
Okay.
I do that because most of the water in places that you find like plumifrons and basiliscus is volcanic runoff water that's really high in minerals. I mean, you've probably heard of you can go to Costa Rica and get in those, I forget what they call them when you sit in a pool of water in a mountain.
Yep. The hot spring thing.
Hot spring. Thank you.
Yeah. The natural hot tub or whatever you call it.
They've got these crazy minerals that are good for your body.
Yep.
So I add a little extra boost to the actual water that's there. So I mean that's supplementing. It's just in a different format. Instead of dusting my food with it, I'll put it that. And then I make sure that all their feeders are fed a really good natural diet. So and then of course the crayfish are coming directly from nature. They've got the best diet they could have had. And they're out in the sunlight all day long, so and then about 50% of the collection spends half the year outside. And that's a huge, huge plus for them because no matter how good those lights are inside, after those animals are outside for a few weeks, man, their colors are crazy, crazy, crazy. Like you just can't. It's depressing. There's some times when I've got animals inside, I'm thinking, man, they're looking so good, and I'm happy. I'm really happy with how good they look. And then they get outside, I'm like, fuck. They weren't looking that good inside. They were, but it's just not the same. Yeah. It's definitely getting better for sure. I mean, the lighting it's crazy. It's crazy, but I feel like there's a lot of trend online with I don't want to make people mad, but oversensitivity to you'll see somebody comments, what do you think of this? And they've got one of the coil lights, and I don't use any of those coil lights, but right away, everybody say, you can't do that. You've got to have this and you got to have this. And if you're not those, you're going to kill your animal. But the hobby existed for decades without access to any of those other lights, without any of the stuff we have here. And they were somehow keepers found a way to have their animals thrive and reproduce.
Right.
And a lot of the animals that are mainstream captive bred animals today came from those animals that never had access to these modern day lights. So there's so many dynamics that go into keeping animals, and it's not just the lights, and it's not just those things. All of it together makes something really special. But people get really bent out of shape about the lighting stuff. So
Right.
yeah.
And
That said, I fork over tons of money for really expensive lights.
Oh, I'm in that boat.
Yeah,
I get it.
Yeah,
but it is difficult because there is a subset of folks, and of course it's on social media because everything we do is on social media, but that genuinely don't know. They don't know about the time frame that you are speaking of and that you have experience in, and and I'm in the same boat. Like when I tell people about the different things that, when I was in college or when I was in school, and this is how we kept things or did things, they're like, that's dumb. Why would you do that? And it's like, well, the light you're talking about didn't exist. And the animal was there, and I live in Illinois, and I have to keep it alive. Yeah. And that's how that happened. Yeah. And it just, it colors their reaction to, because again, they have never been, especially younger people who are, like maybe just now, like on their own, adults, and can buy, their own animals, and they now have their own kind of freedom to do so. That particular generation, they never didn't have Google. They've never not, and especially when you're talking about like, oh yeah, I talked to the dude at the zoo and I was looking it up in the books and he had a library and stuff. And, there's a whole subset of people that would be like, why did you have to talk to this one guy who had the books or whatever, what are you talking about? Yeah. Like, why can't you just go to Google Scholar and Google Docs and look it up?
But you know what? Here, there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off that comes with having information that accessible. For some reason, people don't access it. It's really bizarre.
Absolutely.
It's really bizarre how much stuff is literally in your pocket. Pull your phone out. The world is at your fingertips, and people won't do it. Yep. There was, I feel like I was very fortunate to be right on the cusp of, a substantial portion of my life in a non-digital era, because it made me appreciate going to the library and spending hours and digging through those books to find these obscure things, and that to put the work in. It was a lot of work, and it reinforced in my brain, like what I wanted to do with it. It's funny because like herpetology was a driver for so many things in my life. When I was in high school, I wasn't the best student. I really wasn't interested in anything but zoology. And so I couldn't really put, the crazy thing is I had these amazing skills that I developed for research. I could go and find out anything I wanted to, but I didn't know how to translate that into a skill for school because I didn't want to do it. I wasn't interested in it.
Right.
And then I learned some valuable things along the way that I bring into my parenting now as a father. In my sophomore year, I was taking Spanish and sitting at my desk, not paying attention to Spanish. I looked over at the bulletin board, and there was a big poster on the thing about a student exchange to Ecuador. And I was reading it, and it talks about a visit to the Amazon, a week in the Galapagos Islands. And I'm reading this, and I was like, what am I looking at right now? As soon as class, everything else I didn't hear for the rest of class. Bell rang. I went straight to the teacher, and I was like, what is that? What is that? And she laughed because I had an F in Spanish. And she was like, that's a student exchange. That's probably not something you're interested in. And I was like, I'm interested in that. I want to do that. What is that? And she was like, we don't even have this conversation. You're not even passing Spanish. And by the next semester, I had an A in Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, now, what is that? Long story short, I did a student exchange to Ecuador and got to go to the Galapagos Islands. It was my first trip to the Amazon then as well. And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. All because I just wanted to go to the Amazon and the Galapagos. I got everything else that went with the trip, as well. But that was my motivating factor in getting better at everything.
Yeah.
I have a very keen sense of geography. And it's not because I like geography. It's because I learned where everything in the world comes from that I was interested in. And,
right.
And that's kind of how I've taught my kids geography. I mean, every placard at the zoo has a map and a highlighted area of the world, so my 2-year-old can be like, this was from Africa, because they can identify the outline of Africa in there. And so there's just so many things that if a young person has an interest that they can be crossovers. I became fluent in Spanish because of my interest in herpetology, not because I wanted to speak Spanish. I wanted to go to South America.
Yeah.
And then that later in life, when I look at my real career, became so valuable. And, it's funny, all the little things along the way that come into play.
Absolutely. All right, man. Well, we are cruising at like an hour and 15.
It's been fun. I appreciate it.
So, where can folks find you and keep up to date with you? And do you have
almost everything lizard is on Instagram at Caskheaded. That's where I kind of just every day I put up images of the day, stuff that's going on in the collection that happened that day, eggs hatch, building projects, all that stuff. Everything's on there. And again, it's just sort of I'm raising my flag for people that are interested in the species that I'm working with. Every day I meet a few new ones. And then I make posts on Facebook in groups, but I don't put a whole lot of stuff on my actual Facebook wall. I like to keep it separate from the rest of my career so that herpetology is my little escape. I've got all my stuff I do all day, and then this is just mine. I can keep it mine. It's nice.
For sure.
Yeah. But Instagram for sure.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, I really appreciate you talking to me.
Thank you.
I'm very glad that I found your Instagram page, and honestly, I like I said, I just kind of lucked into seeing the same images showed up in some of the rare groups that I'm in, and I was like, wait a minute, I have seen these lizards, and there aren't that many people working with them, so this has to be the guy.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, I'm
still
really
learning
all
the rules. When I first joined some of those rare groups, I put my Instagram handle and they deleted all my stuff or didn't approve it and I was like, oh, I guess I should have read the rules. I guess I can't do that. So
yeah.
I put the updates in about 3 or 4 groups and then of course all that same stuff's always on my Instagram. So.
Right. Awesome. When I post the episode, I will put your Instagram handle on it to make sure folks know.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I think we're good to go. All right, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Likewise. Have a good evening.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. That was episode 7 with Eric Haycraft of basilislizards.com. And the Instagram handle is at Caskheaded, CASQUEHEADED. It's awesome. I've been following his page for quite a while. He posts all 3 species that he has. He's posting a bunch of stuff about the new species. Like I said, he also just made a recent post about his lighting upgrades, and you guys heard him describe all the crazy stuff he does to light his enclosures. When he was talking about that pyramid that he built, it's awesome. He just recently tore that whole thing out, redid it, updated it, painted it. A lot of his stuff does include his kids, which I think is super cool. So I would encourage everybody to check that out. So, all right. I will see you again in 2 weeks. And I know I said last time that we would keep on Sundays. The next couple will actually be on Sundays. I was actually talking to Eric this time, and I I messaged him and said, "Hey, I forgot it was the Super Bowl. I'm really sorry. How about Saturday?" And he was cool, so he came on a day early. So I appreciate that. But the next couple will actually be on Sundays because then I won't have to compete with one of the largest media events in the world, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. So thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Later.